I'm Clara, I'm 35 years old, and my world had just stopped turning. People talk about grief coming in waves, but that's not right. It's not a wave that crashes over you and then recedes. It's a complete change in atmospheric pressure. It's an ocean you're suddenly plunged into, the water thick and cold, and you forget what it feels like to breathe. Just today, under a heavy, unforgiving sky in Berlin, Germany, I buried my husband. My Mark. My everything. The silence in the taxi on the way to the airport was a physical presence, louder than any sound I'd ever heard. It was the sound of a future, our future, being sealed in a box and lowered into the earth. It was the sound of alone. After 30 agonizing, sleepless hours of travel, a blur of sterile airports, recycled air, and the drone of jet engines, my plane finally touched down in Austin, Texas. Every muscle in my body ached with a weariness that went bone deep, a physical manifestation of my shattered heart. I was a ghost haunting my own body, running on the last fumes of adrenaline and the desperate, primal need to be home, to be somewhere that felt safe, somewhere that still smelled like him. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling so badly that the simple act of unlocking it took 3 tries. I opened our family group chat, the one ironically named Miller Madness. The name, once a fond inside joke, now felt like a cruel mockery. With a deep breath that did nothing to calm the frantic hummingbird wings in my chest, I typed out the words, simple and direct. Flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up? I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over it. I was begging. I knew I was. I was begging for a lifeline, for a moment of comfort in the vast, terrifying emptiness of my new life. I was praying for a sign that I wasn't going to face this new reality completely on my own. The reply from my brother, Kevin, came almost instantly. 3 little dots appeared, a digital heartbeat of anticipation, then disappeared. My own heart pounded against my ribs. Then, the message loaded, cold and clinical on the glowing screen. We're busy. Try Uber. The words were like a physical blow, knocking the last bit of air from my lungs. Busy. They were busy. I reread the message, my brain refusing to process it. It had to be a mistake, a cruel typo. But there it was, stark and clear. Before I could even absorb the sting, another message popped up, this one from my mother. Why didn't you plan better, Clara? Plan better? My mind reeled. I had just planned an international funeral. I had navigated a labyrinth of paperwork in a language I barely understood, signed forms that legally declared my husband dead, and chosen a final resting place for the love of my life, all while my soul was being systematically torn to shreds. What plan could have possibly prepared me for this? For any of this? Hot, thick tears blurred my vision, spilling down my cheeks. With trembling fingers, I managed to type back 2 simple words that felt like the biggest, most pathetic lie I'd ever told, no worries. I sank back into the cramped airplane seat, a hollow chasm opening in my chest. I felt myself silently collapsing inside, piece by piece, like a building imploding in slow motion. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly have imagined as I sat there, broken and abandoned by the people who should have been my rock, was that within a matter of hours, my family would be watching my personal tragedy unfold on their evening news, their casual cruelty broadcast for the entire city to see. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Your support means more to me than you'll ever know. And please, hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever felt completely abandoned when you needed someone the most. You are not the only one out there. The pain from those text messages was a different kind of grief. It was the sharp, acidic grief of betrayal, of realizing that the people who were supposed to catch you were the very ones letting you fall. And that fall, I would soon learn, was just the beginning of a nightmare that would nearly cost me my life. Before grief rewrote my entire existence, my life was a novel I loved reading. It wasn't a thriller or a bestseller, but it was a warm, comforting story I never wanted to end. It was rich in what truly mattered, love, laughter, and a deep, unshakable sense of home. That home wasn't a place, it was a person. It was Mark. We met in the most cliché way possible, during our sophomore year of college. He'd spilled an entire grande latte on my economics textbook in the quietest corner of the library. The resulting chaos was anything but quiet. I was furious, he was mortified, and somehow, through his torrent of apologies, he managed to turn my ruined textbook into a dinner date. He had this incredible way about him, a gentle confidence and a laugh so genuine it could make the worst day feel bright. From that day forward, we were a single unit, an unbreakable team. We married right after graduation, 2 kids with big dreams, a mountain of student debt, and not much else. We packed up a U-Haul and moved to Austin to build our life together. And we did. We built a beautiful life from scratch. I found a job I loved as a marketing director, and Mark, a brilliant software engineer, quickly thrived in Austin's burgeoning tech scene. He wasn't just a problem solver with code, he was a problem solver with life. He was the calm to my storm, the logic to my emotion, the steady hand that always held mine. We bought a cozy 2-story house with blue shutters and a backyard that became my sanctuary. Every spring, I'd pour my heart and soul into my garden, coaxing life from the Texas soil. Mark would always come outside, steal a sun-warmed tomato right off the vine, and joke that my vegetables were good enough to win ribbons at the state fair. "You should enter them, Clara," he'd say, juice dripping down his chin. We'd be tomato tycoons. 10 years of marriage passed like a beautiful, sun-drenched dream. We weren't just husband and wife, we were best friends. We traveled when we could, saved diligently for our future, and had fiercely competitive game nights with our friends every Thursday. We had just started talking seriously about starting a family. The conversation had shifted from someday to soon. We'd even converted the spare bedroom from a messy storage space into a bright, airy home office. We both agreed, with knowing smiles, that it could easily become a nursery when the time was right. We had it all planned out. We had our whole lives planned out. Everything changed last fall. Mark's talent had been noticed, and he was offered a 6-month contract with a major international tech company in Berlin. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, a massive step for his career, and a chance for us to experience living abroad together. I arranged to work remotely for a long stretch in the middle of his contract. We were so excited, buzzing with the thrill of the adventure ahead. The night before he left, we had a special dinner at home. I can still remember every detail, the soft jazz playing on the speaker, the flickering candles on our dining table, the intense way Mark looked at me when he promised this opportunity would make our future even brighter. 6 months will fly by, you'll see, he assured me, his fingers intertwined with mine across the table. His thumb traced circles on my palm. And then we'll come home and start the next chapter, I promise. He was my anchor, my partner, my entire world. He was the man I was going to grow old with. He was my future. He was right, in a way. A new chapter was about to begin. But it wasn't a chapter we would write together. It was a chapter one would be forced to write alone, and I had no idea that its first pages would be filled with so much darkness, betrayal, and pain. The first 2 months apart were a bittersweet challenge. We became masters of the video call, navigating the 7-hour time difference with religious dedication. Our days were bookended by each other's faces on a screen, me, bleary-eyed with my first cup of coffee, him, winding down after a long day at the office. The distance was a constant, dull ache, but we made it work. We were a team, and this was just a temporary deployment. I flew out to visit him for 3 wonderful weeks around the holidays, and it felt like a second honeymoon. The distance melted away the moment I saw him waiting for me at the airport. Berlin was beautiful, a city humming with history and vibrant energy. Mark showed me around with an infectious pride, introducing me to his new coworkers, who were all incredibly kind. We spent our weekends exploring quaint German villages, eating schnitzel, and drinking mulled wine at festive Christmas markets. Everything seemed perfect. We walked for hours along the Spree River, our hands linked inside his coat pocket, seriously discussing trying for a baby as soon as his contract was up. The future felt so close, so real I could almost taste it. It tasted like hope. Then came the call that shattered my world into a million unrecognizable pieces. A call that proved how fragile hope really is. I was back in Austin, sitting in a sterile conference room at work, in the middle of a quarterly marketing presentation. My phone buzzed on the table with our scheduled morning chat. Mark's face filled the screen, but my smile froze. Something was wrong. He looked pale, drawn, with dark circles under his eyes. He kept massaging his temples, wincing. "I've got this killer headache, Clara," he said, trying to force a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's like a vice grip. Probably just stress. This big project deadline is a monster." My heart clenched with worry. I told him to take it easy, to leave work early and get some rest. He promised he would. "I love you," he said, his voice sounding tired but full of love. "Talk to you tomorrow." They were the last words I would ever hear him speak. 8 hours later, my phone rang again. It was Mark's number lighting up the screen. I answered with a cheerful, "Hey, you. Feeling better?" But it wasn't his voice on the other end. It was a woman, her voice strained with panic, speaking in heavily accented English. She was one of his coworkers. She told me Mark had collapsed during a late afternoon meeting. He'd been rushed to the Cherite hospital. The world tilted on its axis and spun out of control. I don't remember the rest of the conversation. I don't remember ending the call or the garbled explanation I gave to my boss. My body moved on autopilot, a machine programmed with one single, desperate objective: get to him. I booked the first available flight, a frantic, blurry process of credit cards and confirmation numbers that seemed to take an eternity. The flight to Berlin was the longest 26 hours of my life. Every minute was a new form of torture, my mind a relentless slideshow of worst-case scenarios. By the time I finally arrived, sprinting through the massive Berlin airport and into a taxi, it was too late. Not too late in the way I feared most, but too late for him to know I was there, to hear my voice, to feel my touch. Mark was in a deep coma. A brain aneurysm, the German doctor explained in careful, clinical English, his face grim. A tiny, weak spot in a vessel in his brain, a ticking time bomb we never knew existed, had ruptured. He used the word catastrophic. They had performed emergency surgery, but the damage, he said, was too severe. For 5 days, I lived in a surreal, time-warped nightmare. I sat by his hospital bed in that sterile, white room, the only sound the rhythmic, indifferent beep of the machines that were breathing for him. I held his hand, a hand that was warm but frighteningly unresponsive. I talked to him, I read to him from his favorite book, I told him stories about our life in Austin, about our garden, about our future. I prayed to a God I wasn't even sure I believed in anymore, my prayers raw, desperate bargains whispered into the antiseptic air. I begged for a miracle. For him to squeeze my hand, to open his eyes, to come back to me. But the miracle never came. On the 5th day, the beeping stopped. Mark never regained consciousness. My brilliant, vibrant, loving husband was gone. He was only 37 years old. I had lost him. And as I sat there, the sudden, deafening silence of the room pressing in on me, I slowly began to realize the terrifying truth. I was completely, utterly alone, adrift in a sea of grief in a country where I knew no one, facing a new, horrifying chapter of my life that had only just begun. The nightmare of dealing with a foreign hospital system alone was overwhelming. It was a bureaucratic maze designed to break a person who was already in pieces. Every form was a confusing jumble of German words that my phone's translation app struggled to make sense of. Words like Sterberkunde and Leichenpass became a horrifying new vocabulary. Every conversation was stilted, filtered through harried hospital interpreters who always seemed to be rushing off to a more urgent tragedy. I felt invisible, a grieving ghost haunting the hallways of a place where life and death were a matter of routine. I called my family back home daily, clinging to the phone like a lifeline, desperate for a comforting voice, for emotional support. But the line always felt cold. Our conversations were brief, always cut short by the pressing demands of their lives back in Austin. "We're praying for you, honey," they would say, a meaningless platitude, before explaining why they needed to get off the phone. A meeting Kevin couldn't miss. A doctor's appointment my mom had. A dinner reservation they had made weeks ago. Life in Austin, it seemed, was just too busy to be interrupted by my earth-shattering loss. Their sighs of inconvenience were almost louder than their words of comfort. One afternoon, my mother called. My heart leaped with a pathetic, childish hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the call where she said, "I've booked a flight. I'm coming to be with you." Instead, her first question was, "Clara, have you thought to purchase travel insurance? Your father and I were just wondering about the costs." The question was so cold, so breathtakingly practical, it felt like a slap in the face. Later that day, my brother Kevin, ever the efficiency expert, suggested I hire a local bereavement service to handle things so I could come home sooner. "It's probably more efficient that way, sis," he'd reasoned. "No point in you getting bogged down in all that paperwork." But I couldn't leave Mark. I couldn't hand him over to strangers. Not like that. Not in a country where he knew no one but his coworkers. So, I stayed. I handled everything myself. The paperwork for his death certificate took 3 full days and countless visits to different government offices, or amts, spread across the sprawling city of Berlin. Each visit was a new level of hell, trying to explain my situation through grief-choked words and a faulty translation app. Arranging for his burial was the next agonizing hurdle. The cost of transporting his body home to the States was prohibitively expensive, a 5-figure sum I simply didn't have. This fact seemed to shock my family more than the death itself. When I told them I would have to bury him in Germany, there was a long, telling pause on the line. My parents said the flight was just too expensive on such short notice. My brother had critical work obligations he couldn't possibly get out of. The excuses were flimsy, transparent, and utterly devastating. So, the funeral was small and quiet. A few of his kind coworkers, who had become my only source of comfort, a couple of expats he had befriended, and me. No family. No lifelong friends to share stories or offer a comforting hug. I stood alone, a solitary figure in black, as they lowered the casket of the man who was my entire world into the cold German ground, a world away from everyone and everything we had ever loved. The financial strain was a separate, crushing weight. Our insurance covered some of the hospital expenses, but international policies are a minefield of limitations and loopholes I never thought to examine before tragedy struck. I drained our savings account. I maxed out our credit cards to pay for the mounting medical bills and the funeral. Through it all, I kept updating my family, sending photos of his simple headstone, hoping someone, anyone, would offer more than just brief condolences or useless, practical suggestions. Looking back, I realize I was a fool. I was begging for empathy from people who didn't have any to give. As I stood by his grave for the last time, a cold wind whipping around me, I finally understood a painful, liberating truth. For my family, love and support were commodities with a price tag, and in my moment of desperate, bankrupting need, I had been deemed a poor investment. Before I left for Berlin all those weeks ago, back when the world was still painted in vibrant colors of hope and promise, I'd sat down with Kevin at my kitchen table in Austin. The smell of coffee hung in the air, and sunlight streamed through the window. Mark and I had a joint account where his paycheck was deposited, and from which our mortgage was automatically paid each month. It was a seamless system we'd set up years ago. Just to be safe, I gave Kevin the login information. "Kev, could you just promise me you'll check this every couple of weeks?" I had asked. "Just to make sure everything is running smoothly while I'm helping Mark get settled." He had clapped me on the shoulder, his smile broad and reassuring. "Of course, Clara. Don't you worry about a thing," he had said with all the confidence in the world. "You just go take care of your husband. I've got your back here." 100%. I had trusted him implicitly. He was my brother. While I was drowning in the administrative nightmare in Berlin, sorting through Mark's final effects, I got an automated email from our mortgage company. The subject line, in stark, impersonal letters, read, "Payment overdue, action required." My mind was so fogged with grief, I barely registered its significance. It felt like one more piece of incomprehensible bad news in a sea of it. Thinking it was a simple glitch, I forwarded it to Kevin with a quick note, "Can you check on this? The mortgage payment." I didn't hear back. A day later, my anxiety gnawing at me, I called him. He answered, but his voice was impatient, distracted. "Clara, I'm swamped at work right now," he sighed, the sound of keyboard clicks in the background. "It's probably just a system error. I'm sure it's fine. You've got much bigger things to worry about over there. Stop stressing over the little things." His condescending tone, calling the roof over my head a little thing, grated on me, but I was too emotionally exhausted to argue. I let it go. I told myself he was right. I had bigger things to worry about. What I didn't know then was the venomous whisper that had been in his ear, the conversation that had sealed my fate. I found out much later, from a guilty cousin who finally confessed at a family holiday, what had really happened. His wife, Jessica, a woman who measured everyone's worth in dollars and cents and saw my tragedy as a potential financial inconvenience to them, had seen the overdue notice on his laptop. "Just leave it, honey," she had told him, her voice like sweet poison. "It's their account, not ours. You don't know what kind of debt they're in with those medical bills. Why should we get involved? Honestly, with the way things are going, who knows, maybe she won't even come back." And my brother, my protector, had listened. He'd let his wife's cold, calculating greed guide his actions. He deliberately chose not to pay the mortgage. He watched the overdue notices pile up in the email account he was supposed to be monitoring and did absolutely nothing. It wasn't that he'd forgotten. It was a conscious, calculated decision. He was protecting his own assets, his own comfort, at the expense of his grieving sister's home. He didn't just fail to have my back, he had positioned a knife directly in it. He chose money over family. He chose his wife's cruel suggestion over his solemn promise to me. As I packed Mark's belongings in our quiet, lonely Berlin apartment, his favorite sweaters that still smelled faintly of him, the books he was halfway through reading, the small, silly souvenirs we'd bought together, I had no idea that back in Austin, the home we had built together, the very foundation of our life, was in jeopardy. I was trying desperately to save the memory of my husband, while my own brother was actively, secretly helping to dismantle our future. That single, cruel act of financial betrayal was a secret, ticking time bomb, just waiting for me to get home to completely explode. The journey home from Berlin stretched over 30 agonizing hours, a special kind of purgatory designed for the grieving. First, a 6-hour delay in Germany due to mechanical issues. I sat stranded in the sterile airport terminal, a ghost among the living, watching families laugh and couples hold hands, each happy seeing a fresh stab to my already bleeding heart. The delay was followed by a missed connection in New York, forcing an overnight stay in a soulless, beige airport hotel where the silence in the room screamed Mark's absence from every corner. The final leg of the flight, from New York to Austin, was marked by turbulence so severe that the flight attendants remained strapped in their seats for 2 straight hours. The plane bucked and dropped like a stone in a well, and with each violent lurch, a part of me didn't care if we made it. A dark, weary part of me just wanted it all to be over. One way or another. During those endless hours suspended between continents, my mind, with nowhere else to go, kept returning to my childhood, seeing patterns of neglect I had previously excused or explained away. I remembered the time I was 8 and broke my arm falling from our backyard treehouse. My parents took me to the emergency room, but then left me with a neighbor to wait for the doctor because they had to take Kevin to his championship soccer game. "The team is counting on him," my mother had explained, ruffling my hair as I cradled my grotesquely angled arm. It was as if my pain was a minor inconvenience in the grand drama of my brother's life. I remembered the time I won a full academic scholarship to my dream college, and my father's first question wasn't one of pride, but of finance. "Will this cost us anything?" They had fully funded Kevin's out-of-state university, covering his tuition and his expensive sports camps, but I was told I had to work 2 jobs to cover my own expenses because my education was my own choice, and therefore, my own financial burden. It was a lifetime of being second. A lifetime of my needs being negotiable. As the plane finally began its descent into the familiar landscape of Austin, I made one last, desperate attempt at connection. My fingers felt heavy as I messaged the family chat again. Just landed. Heading to baggage claim now. I held my breath, harboring a foolish, irrational hope that someone had a change of heart. That seeing my landed message would spark some ember of compassion. The replies came as I navigated the crowded terminal, my body on autopilot, my soul numb. Kevin, seriously, sis, we can't just rearrange our whole day last minute. This is why planning exists. Mom, your father and I have dinner with the Hendersons tonight. We RSVP'd weeks ago. It would be rude to cancel. Dad, the forecast says rain later. Drive carefully when you get home. Not a single "how are you?" Not one "are you okay?" Not an ounce of acknowledgement for what I had just endured. I stood at the baggage claim, a solitary island in a sea of joyful reunions, watching suitcases circle endlessly on the conveyor belt. Mine were easy to spot, one large black suitcase with my own clothes, and 2 others filled with the precious, heartbreaking fragments of Mark's life that I couldn't bear to leave behind. As I struggled toward the exit with the heavy, unwieldy luggage cart, one of the front wheels jammed, sending the top suitcase, the one with Mark's clothes, crashing to the polished airport floor. The latch burst open, spilling his life out for all to see. A blue sweater, his worn running shoes, the silk tie he wore to our 10th anniversary dinner. I dropped to my knees, frantically gathering his things as hot, shameful tears blurred my vision. "Let me help you with that, ma'am." A woman in an airport uniform knelt beside me. Her name tag read Maria. She had kind, crinkled eyes that held no judgment, only warmth. "Are you all right?" The simple, direct question broke me. "My husband died," I whispered, the words ragged and torn from my throat. I just buried him in Germany." Maria's expression softened with genuine, heartbreaking compassion. She helped me repack the suitcase in silence, then personally escorted me to the rideshare pickup area. "Is someone coming for you, honey?" she asked gently. I just shook my head, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "No," I finally managed. "My family is busy." Her frown spoke volumes. The Uber cost $78. The kindness of that stranger was priceless. But as the car pulled away from the curb, I knew her kindness was a temporary balm. I was heading home to a house, and a family, that was anything but. The Uber ride through the familiar streets of Austin felt completely alien. The driver, an older man named Paul, tried to make polite conversation, pointing out new restaurants and buildings that had gone up since I'd been away. I gave vague, one-word answers, afraid my voice would crack and unleash a flood of tears if I tried to say more. He seemed to sense my distress and mercifully turned on some soft music, letting the silence settle between us. When we finally pulled into my driveway, my heart ached with a profound sense of wrongness. The house looked exactly as I had left it, yet it was completely different. It was just a structure of wood and brick now, a hollow shell. The life within it, the laughter and love that had made it a home, was gone. Mark would never again pull into this driveway, never again complain about the maple tree dropping seeds that clogged the gutters, never again open that front door with his signature goofy grin. Paul, a man I'd known for all of 20 minutes, helped me carry the heavy luggage to the porch. "Are you sure you're okay, miss?" he asked, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. "You seem, well, like you might need someone." I assured him I was fine, a lie that tasted like ash in my mouth, tipped him generously, and watched his taillights disappear down the street into the twilight. I fumbled with my house keys, my hands numb and clumsy from cold and exhaustion. The door swung open to reveal a cold, dark, and utterly silent interior. The air inside was stale and frigid. I had specifically asked my mother to come by and turn on the heat the day before my arrival. It was a simple, 5-minute task. She had apparently forgotten. A mountain of mail overflowed from the basket by the door and spilled onto the floor, another task my family had promised to handle but had clearly ignored. I trudged through the pile, my boots crunching on envelopes, advertisements, and junk mail. And then I saw it. It was peeking out from under a pile of glossy catalogs. A large, official-looking envelope from our mortgage company. It was thicker than the others, and a stark, terrifying red stamp was visible through the plastic window, foreclosure warning. Final notice. My blood ran cold. My breath hitched in my throat. I tore it open, my hands shaking so violently I could barely read the words. The letter, in cold, legalistic terms, detailed 2 months of missed payments. It spoke of exorbitant penalty fees and the threat of immediate legal action. It said we were in default. The words blurred together: delinquency, acceleration clause, legal proceedings. My brother hadn't just forgotten. This wasn't a mistake. This was a deliberate act of breathtaking betrayal. Standing there, in the freezing, dark foyer of my home, the reality hit me with the force of a physical assault. He had tried to let me lose my house. He had been willing to let the bank take everything Mark and I had ever worked for. Before the full weight of that monstrous betrayal could even sink in, I heard a strange gurgling sound coming from the back of the house. It was a sound that didn't belong. I walked numbly toward the kitchen, my feet leaden, and flipped on the light switch. I gasped in horror. Water was pouring from a massive, ugly crack in the ceiling, cascading down the kitchen cabinets and pooling in a sickening, reflective sheet across the tile floor. A pipe in the ceiling, located directly above the kitchen, had frozen solid in the unheated house and then burst. The water was already inches deep, seeping under the hardwood floors of the adjoining dining room, causing the beautiful oak planks to buckle and warp into grotesque, undulating waves. Water dripped ominously from the light fixtures, a terrifying electrical hazard waiting to happen. I stood there, ankle-deep in ice-cold water, holding a foreclosure notice in my hand, staring at the absolute destruction of my home. After everything, losing Mark, the lonely funeral in a foreign land, the financial ruin, my family's complete abandonment, this almost seemed comical. Of course. Of course my homecoming would include a flooded house and the threat of homelessness. It was the final, devastating punchline to a cruel joke I never wanted to hear. My first, panicked call was to an emergency plumber. My voice was tight with a desperate urgency as I explained the situation. The dispatcher's voice on the other end was sympathetic but crushingly firm. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. We've got calls from all over the city. This winter storm has everyone's pipes bursting. We're completely backed up for days. The absolute earliest we could get someone out there is Tuesday afternoon." Tuesday. It was Friday night. The water was still dripping from the ceiling, a torturous, rhythmic reminder of my home's slow-motion destruction. The house was an icebox, and getting colder by the minute. My next call, a desperate, foolish one born of pure, animalistic panic, was to my brother. Kevin answered on the 4th ring, his voice distracted and loud with the background chatter of music and laughter. "Hey, I can't really talk right now," he said brusquely, the words rushed. "Jessica and I are getting ready for that big dinner with her boss I mentioned. It's a huge deal for her career." "The house is flooded, Kevin," I said, my voice flat, hollowed out of all emotion. "A pipe burst in the ceiling. There's water everywhere, and the plumber can't come until Tuesday." I didn't even mention the mortgage letter. I couldn't form the words. The betrayal was too raw, too monstrous to speak aloud. "Wow, that really sucks," he replied, and I could practically hear his eyes rolling. His tone was more annoyed than concerned. "Did you try calling other plumbers? You should probably check Angie's List or something like that." His solution was for me to do more work, to solve the problem myself. "Kevin," I pleaded, the words catching in my throat, tasting of shame. "I just got back from burying my husband. I've been traveling for over a day. I am so tired. I can't stay here." There's water in the electrical fixtures and there's no heat. It's freezing. Could I possibly stay with you? Just for a night or two? Just until this gets sorted out? The silence that followed was deafening, a gaping void on the other end of the line. It told me everything before he even spoke the words. Ugh, actually, tonight is just really bad timing, Clara, he finally said, the fake, strained sympathy in his voice making my stomach turn. Like I said, we have Jessica's boss coming over. He's a potential client I've been trying to land for months. We can't just cancel. And our guest room is, well, it's full of Jessica's crafting supplies right now. It's a total mess, you wouldn't want to sleep in there. He didn't even try to sound convincing. The excuses were flimsy, insulting. Have you called Mom and Dad? He finished, clearly eager to pass the burden along. I ended the call without saying goodbye, my hand trembling as I dialed my parents. My mother answered with an immediate, well-rehearsed cascade of excuses. Oh, honey, she chirped, her voice falsely bright, as if I'd called to share good news. You know we would normally say yes in a heartbeat, you know that, but the bridge club is meeting here tomorrow afternoon, and we've spent all day preparing the house. Every room is spotless. Plus, your father's back has been acting up terribly. We just can't handle guests right now. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Bridge club. My father's notoriously fickle back. These were the reasons they would leave their newly widowed, effectively homeless daughter to fend for herself in a flooded, freezing, and dangerous house. What about a hotel? My mother suggested brightly, as if it were the most obvious, simple solution in the world. You should have insurance for that sort of thing, right? That was it. The final door had just been slammed, bolted, and barricaded in my face. By this point, I hadn't eaten a proper meal in over 24 hours. The triple blow of international travel, profound grief, and this new, escalating crisis had left me physically and emotionally depleted. I felt lightheaded and nauseated as I waded through the flooded kitchen, my only goal to find anything edible. I found a package of stale crackers in a cupboard and ate them mechanically, standing in water that had soaked through my shoes and socks, my feet already numb and tingling from the unrelenting cold. Everything felt distant, unreal, like I was watching a movie about someone else's miserable life. I was a character in someone else's tragic play. And I had no idea how I was supposed to get off the stage. In a last, desperate, and deeply foolish attempt to fix something, anything, in my crumbling world, I decided to check the electrical panel in the basement. Maybe, I thought with the flawed logic of a sleep-deprived, grieving mind, I could shut off the power to the kitchen and get some of the baseboard heaters working in another part of the house. It was a dangerous idea, born of pure, unfiltered desperation. The basement stairs were slick with a thin, treacherous film of water that had seeped down from the kitchen above. I gripped the wooden railing tightly, each step a careful, deliberate movement as I made my way into the musty darkness. The concrete floor of the basement was partially flooded, the icy, black water reaching my ankles as I sloshed toward the electrical panel on the far wall. The only light was from my phone's flashlight, its single, weak beam cutting a shaky path through the oppressive gloom, casting long, dancing shadows that looked like grasping fingers. As I reached for the small metal latch on the panel door, my soaked running shoe slipped on the wet, slick concrete. My body pitched forward uncontrollably. My hand flew out instinctively to brace my fall, and my damp palm slapped directly against the cold, metal surface of the box. A sharp, violent jolt of pure electricity shot through my arm. It felt like being struck by lightning. My muscles seized in an instant, 1,000 volts of agony, and the sheer force of the shock threw me backward, my body airborne for a split second. My head struck something hard and unyielding, a wooden support beam, a metal shelf, I'll never know. For a moment, a universe of white, blinding stars exploded behind my eyes, and then, everything went mercifully black. I came to on the cold, wet concrete of the basement floor, my body shivering violently and uncontrollably, my teeth chattering so hard I thought they would break. My entire right arm tingled with a painful, pins and needles sensation, a phantom current still coursing through it. I felt something warm and sticky trickling down the side of my face. When I shakily brought my fingers to my temple, they came away dark and red with blood. The fall had left a deep, searing gash just above my eyebrow. Struggling to my feet was a monumental effort. A wave of intense dizziness washed over me, and the dark, damp basement seemed to tilt and spin around me like a sickening carnival ride. I staggered toward the stairs, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. Each step up required immense, singular concentration. Halfway up, I had to stop and sit down on the wet steps, my vision blurring at the edges, black spots dancing in front of my eyes like angry insects. By the time I finally reached the main floor again, crawling the last few feet, I was barely conscious. I collapsed onto the sofa in the living room, a beached wail of grief and pain, unable to go any further. The house had grown even colder, and a deep, penetrating chill had settled into my bones. I could no longer feel my fingers or my toes. Some distant, rational part of my mind, the part that wasn't concussed and traumatized, recognized the textbook symptoms of hypothermia setting in. But I couldn't summon the energy to care. I was so tired. So profoundly tired of fighting. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, a high-pitched, insistent beeping began to penetrate the thick fog in my brain. Beep. 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 It was shrill, relentless. It was the carbon monoxide detector in the hallway. The heating system, likely damaged by the water or malfunctioning due to the storm, was pumping poison into the air. The toxic, invisible gas was filling the enclosed, cold house while I lay incapacitated, unable to move, unable to call for help. My phone lay on the coffee table, just inches from my outstretched hand, yet it might as well have been on the moon. My limbs refused to cooperate. My muscles wouldn't obey my brain. Darkness crept in from the edges of my vision, a slow, final curtain call. In what I believed might be my final conscious moments, a strange, almost welcome calm settled over me. If this was how it ended, at least the pain would stop. At least I would be with Mark again. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness completely was the sound of someone pounding on the front door and a muffled, frantic voice calling out my name. Then nothing but a vast, silent, and welcoming darkness. The pounding on the door was from my neighbor, Brenda. A kind, retired woman from across the street, a woman with whom I'd only ever shared polite waves and small talk about the weather. She later told reporters that she'd been getting her mail and noticed water flowing out from under my front door. It was a strange sight that quickly turned alarming as the water began to form treacherous, icy slicks on my porch steps in the freezing temperatures. Concerned, she had tried calling my phone first. When I didn't answer, her concern turned to genuine worry, and she came over to investigate. When her loud knocks went unanswered but she heard the high-pitched, relentless shriek of the carbon monoxide alarm blaring from inside, she didn't hesitate. She immediately called 911. The firefighters had to break down my front door with a battering ram. The sound, she said, was like an explosion. They found me unconscious on the sofa, pale and barely breathing. They later said the house was dangerously cold, partially flooded, and the carbon monoxide levels in the air were well above the safety threshold. One of the paramedics who transported me to Austin General Hospital, a man with tired but kind eyes, reportedly told the ER doctor, "A few more hours, and we would have been looking at a recovery, not a rescue." I was a medical disaster. I was suffering from moderate hypothermia, carbon monoxide poisoning, a concussion from the fall, and the lingering aftereffects of a significant electrical shock. It was a bizarre, tragic cocktail of emergencies, a perfect storm of neglect and misfortune that had almost claimed my life. What I didn't know, as the dedicated medical team worked to raise my core body temperature and pump my lungs full of oxygen, was that a local news reporter named David Rios was at the hospital that very night. He was covering a routine story on storm-related injuries for the 10 o'clock news. He overheard a paramedic in the hospital break room discussing my unbelievable case, the bizarre, tragic confluence of events that led to a newly widowed woman, just returned from burying her husband overseas, being found near death in her own neglected home. The human interest angle, the sheer, gut-wrenching drama of it, was too compelling for any reporter to ignore. David Rios interviewed my neighbor, Brenda, right there on her front lawn, with the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles painting the street in red and blue. She looked exhausted when she got home, completely drained, Brenda told the camera, her face etched with genuine concern and regret. I feel terrible now, knowing what she was going through all alone over there. He also managed to speak with one of the paramedics who had responded to the 911 call. The man, visibly moved and angered by the situation, shared a detail that would turn my private tragedy into a public firestorm. He had seen my phone on the coffee table beside me. The screen was still lit up, still open to the family group chat. Here's a woman who just lost her husband, asking her family for a simple ride from the airport, the paramedic said to the camera, his voice thick with disbelief and contempt. And they basically told her to get an Uber. They told her she should have planned better. Then she comes home to a house no one has bothered to check on. It's not just heartbreaking. It's outrageous. By 10 p.m., my story was the lead segment on the local news. Local woman returns from husband's overseas funeral to near tragedy. The report detailed everything with chilling accuracy: burying my husband in Germany, the grueling 30-hour journey home, being denied basic support from my family members, and then nearly dying due to a series of what the fire chief called completely preventable household emergencies. Social media amplified the story instantly. Screenshots of the text exchange, likely leaked by someone at the hospital, spread across local community Facebook groups like wildfire. The hashtag #BusyTryUber started trending in Austin. The stark, cruel contrast between my simple, desperate plea and my family's cold, dismissive responses struck a deep, angry chord with thousands of viewers. That evening, as my family sat down for their respective important dinners and social events, they saw it all. The news report, with live, dramatic footage of emergency vehicles parked outside my house, their private, callous conversation broadcast for all of Austin to see, to hear, and to judge. The night nurse, a no-nonsense woman named Carol, later told me they burst into my hospital room like a whirlwind of panicked self-preservation. My brother, Kevin, stormed in first, his face ashen, his expensive overcoat still on. He clutched his phone in his hand like a weapon. "Clara! We just saw the news," he stammered, his eyes wide with fury, not concern. He didn't even ask how I was. His first words were about himself. "They're making it sound like we abandoned you. This is a complete nightmare for us. My boss saw it. Jessica's boss saw it." My mother followed close behind, her face a mask of practiced indignation, already on the defensive. "This is a complete and utter misrepresentation," she announced to the nurse before even glancing at me, lying in the bed with an IV in my arm and a bandage on my head. "We had no idea the house was in such a condition. Clara knows we would have helped if we had understood the full situation. She can be prone to exaggeration." My father, as always, stood silently by the door, his expression unreadable, a statue of inaction in a Brooks Brothers suit. He was a passive observer in the drama of his own family's cruelty. Only when the nurse, with a pointed look, stepped out of the room did my mother's performance truly begin. She rushed to my bedside, her voice suddenly softening to a syrupy, concerned whisper as she touched my arm. "Oh, my poor baby. We're just so grateful you're all right. Don't you worry about a thing. We're taking you home with us, of course. Our family sticks together during difficult times." The hypocrisy was so thick, so suffocating, I could have choked on it. They weren't there because they were worried about me. They were there because they were worried about themselves. They were there to perform a part for the hospital staff, for anyone who might be watching. This wasn't concern, it was frantic, desperate damage control. When Dr. Reynolds came in to discuss my condition and my discharge plan, my mother put on a masterclass performance in maternal devotion. He explained that my recovery would require significant rest, a warm, stable environment, and, he stressed, minimal stress. "She has experienced significant trauma, Clara," he said, looking directly at me, pointedly ignoring them. "Both physical and emotional. Her body and mind need time to heal. What support system do you have in place?" Before I could even form a word, Kevin jumped in, stepping forward. "She has us. We're her family. There was just a huge misunderstanding about her arrival time, a simple communication breakdown, which the media has completely distorted for ratings. Just then, my compassionate day nurse, Linda, entered with my medication. She had been witnessing their charade all morning, her expression growing tighter with each fake platitude. She checked my vitals, then leaned in close and quietly, but clearly, asked me, "Are you comfortable with this plan, Clara? Because I want you to know, there are alternatives if you need them." My mother stiffened, her back going ramrod straight. "Alternatives?" she scoffed. "She is coming home with her family, where she belongs." Linda met my eyes, her gaze steady, a silent offer of strength, ignoring my mother's angry interjection. "The choice is yours, Clara," she said simply. In that moment, something inside me, something that had been frozen with grief and fear, finally cracked. The fog of exhaustion began to clear, replaced by a cold, hard, and empowering clarity. The choice was mine. Not what would make them look good. Not what would smooth things over for their social circle. But what I actually needed to survive. I took a deep breath, the sterile hospital air filling my lungs, feeling like the first real breath I'd taken in weeks. "I'd like to hear about the alternatives," I said, my voice stronger and clearer than it had been in what felt like a lifetime. The room fell silent. Kevin stopped scrolling on his phone, his jaw dropping. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Clara, you can't be serious," she finally managed, her voice trembling with outrage. "After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done?" The question escaped me before I could stop it, but once it was out in the open, I didn't want to take it back. I needed them to hear it. "When Mark was dying, you were too busy to come. When I buried him alone, you said the flights were too expensive. When I needed a ride from the airport after traveling for 30 hours, you suggested I take an Uber. When I called you from a freezing, flooded house, you prioritized a bridge club and a business dinner. So please, tell me, what exactly have you done that entitles you to control my recovery now that the news cameras are watching?" My voice was calm, eerily factual, which seemed to unnerve them more than shouting ever could. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was angry. And for the first time in my entire life, I was finally letting them see it. Kevin stood up abruptly from his chair, his face flushed with a splotchy, red indignation. "That is completely unfair. You're twisting everything. We didn't know how serious it was." "You didn't know because you didn't ask," I interrupted, my voice as cold and sharp as the ice that had formed in my house. Not once did any of you ask me a single, genuine question about how I was really doing. Not once did you offer real help without a long list of excuses and conditions attached. You didn't need to see my near-dead body on the 10 o'clock news to know that I was a grieving widow, all alone and struggling. You just chose not to see it. It was more convenient for you to look away. "We have always supported you, Clara," my mother insisted, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "Perhaps not in the exact way you wanted, but families are complicated. We have our own lives, our own responsibilities. People can't just drop everything for every little crisis. Your expectations are simply unrealistic." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Unrealistic? Was needing a ride from the airport after burying my husband an unrealistic expectation, Mom? Was hoping someone in my family might have checked to make sure the heat was working in my house during a historic winter storm asking too much? Was it unrealistic to think you wouldn't let me lose my house over a mortgage payment you promised to make? We're busy people. Kevin shot back, his voice the defensive whine of a petulant child caught in a lie. We can't be expected to remember every single little detail. Every little detail, I repeated, letting the words hang in the heavy air between us. Like whether your newly widowed sister might freeze to death or be poisoned in her own home. Those little details. My father finally spoke, his voice quiet and subdued, as if trying to placate a wild animal. Clara, we understand you're upset. Grief can make people say things they don't really mean. When you're thinking more clearly, you'll see we were only trying to help. I am thinking more clearly than I have in 35 years, I cut him off, my gaze sweeping over the three of them, seeing them not as my family, but as three strangers united by selfishness. For the first time in my life, I see this family dynamic without the filter of my own desperate need for your approval. I see that I have spent my entire life accepting scraps of your attention and convincing myself it was a feast. I'm done being hungry. I'm done pretending. Just then, as if on cue, the hospital social worker, Ms. Patel, entered with a folder of information. My family fell silent, instantly aware of how a continued argument might appear to an official. With a warm smile directed only at me, Ms. Patel explained the overwhelming outpouring of support from the community. A local restoration company had already started work on my house and had volunteered to do the entire job at no cost. A downtown hotel chain had offered a complimentary 2-week suite while the repairs were being done. A meal delivery service had donated a month of prepared, healthy foods. Several neighbors had called the hospital, leaving their numbers and volunteering to help with anything I needed. The contrast between this unconditional generosity from total strangers and my own family's reluctant, image-conscious support could not have been more stark. While they stared in stunned, open-mouthed silence, I looked at Ms. Patel and said, with complete certainty, "Yes. I accept. Thank you." "This is ridiculous," Kevin finally sputtered, finding his voice. "You're choosing random people over your own blood." I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and felt nothing but a sad, empty space where my love and respect for him used to be. "No, Kevin," I said softly, but with the strength of steel. "I'm choosing kindness over obligation. I'm choosing genuine support over performative care. I am choosing to value myself enough to accept help that comes without conditions or resentment." My mother gathered her expensive purse, her movements stiff with wounded pride. "Fine. When you come to your senses and realize you need us, we'll be waiting. But don't expect us to drop everything again." "That's exactly my point," I replied, the finality of it settling in my bones like stone. "I never could expect that. And now, finally, I no longer will." As they filed out of the room, defeated and exposed, I felt a profound sense of release. It wasn't triumph. It was peace. For the first time, I wasn't trying to get water from an empty, poisoned well. I was finally walking away to find an ocean. The next 3 months passed in a strange, hazy blur of slow, steady, and intentional healing. My 2-week stay at the Riverview Hotel, paid for by the kindness of strangers, was more than just a place to sleep, it was a sanctuary. For the first time since Mark died, I felt safe and cared for. The room was warm, the bed was soft, and every day, nutritious meals would be delivered to my door by volunteers from a local church. It was the space I desperately needed to simply stop, to breathe, to begin to process the layered trauma of the past few months without having to worry about my own survival. My physical recovery progressed more quickly than I had expected. The persistent fog of the concussion finally lifted after several weeks of mandated rest and quiet. The angry red mark from the electrical burn on my hand slowly faded, leaving only a faint, silvery mark on my palm, a permanent reminder of the jolt that nearly ended my life. The gash on my temple healed into a thin white line, mostly hidden by my hairline. They were scars, yes, but I began to see them differently. They weren't marks of damage, they were proof that I had survived. The emotional healing was a far more challenging and winding path. Twice a week, I attended a grief support group that met in the cozy, book-lined meeting room of the local community center. The group was facilitated by a wise, gentle woman named Eleanor, whose insightful questions helped me unpack not just the immense, crushing loss of Mark, but also the complicated, painful grief for the family I thought I had, the family I had spent my whole life pretending to have. "Grief has a way of clarifying what truly matters," Eleanor often said during our sessions. "It strips away all the pretense and forces us to confront the truth, both the beautiful and the painful." And my truth was that I had been abandoned by my family long before I ever stepped on that plane to Berlin. The final abandonment was just the loudest and most undeniable example. My house, in parallel, underwent a transformation that mirrored my internal one. The restoration company, Austin Strong Restorations, didn't just repair the water damage, they made my home better, stronger. They installed a new, smart thermostat that I could monitor from my phone. They replaced the aging water heater with a modern, energy-efficient model. They reinforced the plumbing system to protect against future freezing. What began as utter destruction became an unexpected opportunity for renewal. Throughout this process, neighbors I barely knew before became fixtures in my life. Brenda from across the street, my guardian angel, brought homemade soup every Sunday without fail. Robert and Thomas, a lovely couple from 2 doors down, helped me replant my entire garden once the yard work was completed. They insisted on helping me plant new, vibrant tomato vines in Mark's memory. This community, this collection of kind, compassionate souls, became my lifeline. They asked for nothing in return. They just showed up. They were the family I chose, the family who chose me back. I received occasional, superficial text messages from my biological family. My mother sent a generic, store-bought thinking of you card, signed by all 3 of them in their neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Kevin called once, ostensibly to check on me, but the conversation quickly devolved into him complaining that his clients had seen the news story and it was making things awkward for him at work. I responded politely but briefly, a gray rock against which their waves of self-interest could crash without effect. I was maintaining the boundary I had established in the hospital. It wasn't a punishment, it was protection for my healing, fragile heart. 6 months after Mark's death, using the life insurance funds that had finally been processed after a mountain of paperwork, I established the Mark Miller Memorial Fund for International Education at our alma mater. The scholarship was designed to help students study abroad, but it had a key, non-negotiable provision. It specifically covered emergency travel expenses for family members and provided contingency funds for unexpected situations. It was my way of ensuring no other student, no other family, had to face what I did. It was my way of transforming my pain into purpose. This felt like the perfect way to honor Mark's generous, caring spirit, creating a legacy of care from a legacy of profound neglect. On what would have been our 11th anniversary, a day I had been dreading for months, I decided not to hide from the grief. Instead, I hosted a small, quiet gathering at my rebuilt, renewed home. It was a celebration of life, of memory, and of community. I wanted to officially announce the scholarship's first recipient. My true friends were there, the ones who had sat with me in my grief without trying to fix it. My supportive neighbors were there, their presence a warm, comforting blanket. My grief group was there, people who understood my loss in a way no one else could. It was a room full of my chosen family. The family of my heart. My biological family had, of course, received invitations, but they sent their polite, formal regrets, citing vague prior commitments. I wasn't surprised, nor, for the first time, was I hurt. I simply felt nothing. Their absence was a relief. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. An actual handwritten letter on thick, cream-colored stationery from my father. I had never received a letter from him before in my entire life. Unlike the superficial texts and the empty thinking of you card, this one contained something rare, something shocking, a flicker of reflection. I have been thinking a lot about what happened after you returned from Berlin, he wrote in his stiff, unfamiliar cursive. And while your mother and brother may never be able to see it clearly, I want you to know that I recognize our failure. It was not just a failure in the practical matters of airport rides and house maintenance, but in the deeper, more fundamental obligation to provide comfort during your darkest hours. I have no excuses to offer you, only a late and deeply insufficient acknowledgement. The man you married would be immensely proud of the strong woman you have become in his absence. Perhaps someday, if you are willing, we might find a way forward, not as we were, but as we could be. I didn't respond immediately. The letter required contemplation, not a knee-jerk reaction. I read it to my therapist. What do you want from a relationship with your father? She asked me, a simple question with a complex answer. Not what you think you should want, or what might make him feel better, but what would actually serve your well-being. The question stayed with me for days. Eventually, I wrote back to him, establishing clear, healthy boundaries. I expressed a willingness for occasional lunches, just the two of us, with the explicit understanding that these meetings were exploratory, not obligatory. I would not, I wrote, be returning to family gatherings or holiday celebrations in the immediate future. Any relationship moving forward would have to be based on mutual respect and genuine connection, not on performance or familial obligation. To my surprise, he agreed to these terms without argument. Our first lunch was awkward. The second, slightly less so. We were building something new, something fragile but authentic, on the rubble of our broken past. A year after Mark's death, I stood alone at the airport in Austin, waiting for a flight that would take me back to Berlin to visit his grave. As I watched families reunite all around me, the tearful hugs, the excited chatter, the pure, unadulterated joy of reconnection, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was a lingering, phantom sadness for the family I was born into, for what they could not provide. But the desperate, painful longing I used to feel was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, solid strength. I had learned that family could be created and chosen. That support could come from the most unexpected sources. That boundaries were not walls designed to keep people out, but healthy fences designed to protect the peace within. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth was not, and had never been, determined by my family's inability to see it. The greatest lesson from that terrible, life-altering homecoming wasn't about my family's failures. It was about the remarkable, beautiful capacity of human beings, neighbors, strangers, nurses, plumbers, to step forward and hold space for each other's pain. It was about the profound, healing power of being truly seen in your darkest moments. If you have ever felt abandoned when you needed support the most, please know that you are not alone. Your worth is not defined by others' capacity to recognize it. Sometimes, the people we expect to be there for us simply cannot provide what we need, not because of our lack of value, but because of their own deep-seated limitations. What unexpected sources of support have you discovered during your most difficult times? Have you ever been surprised by the kindness of strangers when those closest to you fell short? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your story matters, and your voice deserves to be heard. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others. You might just help someone else who is feeling alone in their struggles. Remember that your boundaries are valid, and your healing is always possible, sometimes in ways we never, ever could have imagined. Thank you for being a part of this journey with me.